Hi everyone, Tina Swithin, author of Divorcing a Narcissist and founder of One Mom's Battle, and the much anticipated part 2 of my amazing collaboration with Powerhouse attorney, top 1% attorney Rebecca Zung, and the absolutely brilliant and light in a really dark topic, Dr. Ramani, who is one of my heroes in this movement, in this journey of raising awareness of narcissistic abuse. She is just a blessing to so many of us who have gone through this, and very few people can understand what it is like to divorce a narcissist or share custody, co-parenting, any of those things. So I'm really excited to share this part 2 episode with you. Please leave comments below. I read every single comment that comes through, and make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Thanks so much. It was a process. The first few years, had I not been journaling and blogging about it, if I were to look back, I remember very little of it. I feel like I was operating in a state of trauma and shock and emotions. And for me, it was a few years into it before I started going to sit in the courtroom. And it was a way for me to learn about the process and how attorneys handle things and how different case law. And I became a fixture in the courtroom on days that it had nothing to do with me, and just there as an observer, because it allowed first for me to desensitize myself, because it just became part of my so then walking into the courtroom when it was my own case, I was much stronger, and I was educated on what was going on and the motions that I was filing. And I didn't get it right all the time, but it helped tremendously. And what I learned is that so much of it is about strategy, and judges and attorneys, anybody in those courtrooms, they don't want to see your emotions. That was one of the things I learned quickly. Is I would walk to the bathroom in the courthouse and have a panic attack or vomit or break down crying. But when I walked through those doors, I had to, put my shoulders back and my head up, and, almost role play was kind of the mentality I had to have. But, and just forming alliances when I would be in the courtroom and I would see another parent who I could, identify as the healthy parent in the situation, I'd follow them out into the hallway and say, here's my card. Sounds crazy. I'd love to go to coffee with you because we have a lot in common. And that started building my local team. So those were some of the things that I did in the beginning. And from day one, I remember people telling me, this is a 50-50 state. California, I think every state is 50-50 at this point. And that's, truly what you just have to accept that. And I refused. I couldn't even grasp how somebody could, some people, it's truly, their exes are so good at impression management that may be in the cards for them. And then you're forced to accept radical acceptance, managing your expectations, that whole thing. But for me, I couldn't accept that was what was best for my kids. And that was the mentality I kept moving me forward, and really celebrating the little victories, which I consider to be anytime my kids are a little bit safer. And that just kept the momentum going until I think it was about year 6 that we were assigned a custody evaluator, and he really understood what I was up against. And his orders or his recommendation to the court were unlike anything I've ever heard of before. And it was so strict. And the judge ended up saying, I'm not going to adopt all of these because I don't want to micromanage this guy. But the ultimate ruling on year 6 was permanent supervised visits. So he could never again be alone. And the judge said, I intend for these to be final custody orders, which was huge. But as we know, a narcissist can't handle that. Their ego doesn't want someone supervising them. That's a huge threat. And so he jumped ship and we didn't hear from him for a year and a half. But that was a year and a half of peace. And I
Yeah.
was fantastic. So it's those baby steps. It's, you know what, today my kids are a little bit safer, and that kept me going. And when I did, there were so many times where I threw myself a huge pity party when I got slammed in court, and I just always set an end time. I can allow myself a day or two to be mad or angry because it's warranted. But then, Friday, I'm going to dust myself off and I'm going to try again because my kids need me. There's no one else that's going to fight for them.
Absolutely. I just want to inject a little bit of the legal side of some of the things that you just said. And one is that, yeah, there is a kind of unspoken presumption, I'll call it, for this 50-50 thing right now in most of the states. I think there are a couple of holdouts. I think New York doesn't quite have that presumption yet, but it's not necessarily a legal presumption, meaning a legal presumption would mean that when the court sits down, when the judge sits down, then they're going to presume that this is what it's going to be. And then the other person who doesn't want that has the burden of proving why it shouldn't be that. So that would be a legal presumption. So it's not necessarily a legal presumption in a lot of the states, but it's kind of like an unspoken presumption. And so what I want people to remember is that what the real presumption is and should always be is best interest of the child. And I just had a situation with this with the judge back in January. I was at a hearing and the judge, the baby at the time was maybe 5 months old or something like that. And the judge was like, well, you guys are coming to trial in May. So, don't bother coming in here if, that it's going to be 50-50 and whatever. And I'm like, really, Your Honor, before you even hear one word about what's in the best interest of this child, that there's 18 factors in the statute that you're supposed to consider. So if you're making a decision right here and now, then that's grounds for your recusal. And so, right away, he's like, oh, of course, we have to, consider the factors. And, and of course, he backpedaled right away. But, I want people to understand that, yes, it's that, but don't just give up on that. Don't just say that's what it is and be resigned to that. Remind the court, remind the judge, remind everybody you can that the standard is best interest of the child. And there is, I'm sure, a statute in every single state that has, the factors that have to be considered by the court. So don't just resign yourself to that's what it's going to be. So
Rebecca, I have a comment on that though, because despite that, the best interest of the child, anyone who's, doing advocacy work, mental health work, even in the divorce space, in almost all of these cases, I'm willing to hazard a guess that 75 to 90% of these cases, they're not taking into account the best interests of the child.
No,
and these statutes and these 18 points and all this stuff can exist. And in that particular case, it might have even been easier because it was a 5-month-old baby. But when I am seeing over and over and over again is cases where there is no way on planet Earth that the best interest of this child is being accounted for. So even if that's written into the law, and I suppose, yes, it becomes one more grounds of which an attorney could attempt to push the point, I still feel like most judges are going to reject that out of hand because they still feel like the argument of a parent that's antagonistic and toxic and undermining and invalidating and alienating and all the things that they are, is that they're going to say there's no evidence of that. The evidence that you'd have to show that it's not in the best interest of the child is often quite physical. Like you lived 20,000 miles from the kid's school, or you travel 3 weeks a month. They'll run with that. But these subtle psychological factors, which I don't even think are subtle, I am not seeing a judge in America account for this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's the difficulty, right? Because it's it is so subtle, and the judges are always looking for the easy way out.
Yes.
I mean, and so it is difficult. So what you have to do is you have to be able to present a case in such a way that they can't look away. And you can't go in and say the person's a narcissist or, accuse them of any kind of something like that. That's not readily supportable, you know, because that's when you're going to lose your own credibility, even if the person is
Mm-hmm.
the most flaming narcissist
Right.
on the planet. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to go in with, you know, reams of supporting documentation as to what's in the best interest of the child. I mean, Tina nodding her head,
Yeah.
because, you know, you figured it out. And I'm really amazed and give you such props that you were able to go in there and think of the idea of, I'm going to go watch other court proceedings and figure it out. You know, so
Yeah.
talk more about like how
Yeah.
you were able to do that, because, you know, there's so many people out there who can't afford a good lawyer, who can't
Right.
afford, you know, a therapist. They can't afford anything. They're like, you know, you were talking about going to the food pantry or whatever. I mean, if it's like eating versus an attorney, you're going to pick
Right.
eating.
Right.
So talk more about that.
So, you know, I know one of the things from, I talk to parents all the time who will tell me, you know, I don't have time to go sit in the courtroom. You know, I tell them, you don't have time not to.
Mm-hmm.
I was working full time. You know, one of the things I didn't mention, when I left my marriage, um, you know, just so people don't, you know, go, well, you know, she has all these resources or whatnot. I left with $178 to my name, not a penny in retirement, not a penny in, you know, any type of account, literally under $200. And I was working full time. I had 2 little girls in preschool. The cost of preschool is insane when you've got 2 little ones. And but I made that a priority. And you know, however you have to do it, for me, that was the number one. You know, that was the best thing I could have ever done. It gave me so much insight into things attorneys used. And then I would go, you know what? Well, and a lot of people, so, you know, how did you win based on him being a narcissist? I've never used that word. I've written 4 books on the topic, but I've never used that word narcissist to anybody. You know, I focused on his patterns of behavior that were
Exactly.
affecting my kids.
Exactly.
And, you know, and pain, you know, seeing, and one thing I don't think people understand, if I were in courtroom A, I would present my case, my exact case, one way. But if I were in courtroom B, just based on what I know about that judge, I would present my case completely different, because they're human. They bring in their own biases
Yep,
and
they do.
personal. You know, there's a judge down in Southern California who lost a child to a drug overdose. So she takes addiction issues very seriously. My ex-husband was an alcoholic, so you better believe I would hit heavy on the alcoholism in her courtroom. And I think people don't give that, you know, there's no rule book for any of this. And,
It's
you know,
so smart. So
So
smart.
smart. So smart.
thank you. So, you know, so much of it was learning, you know, so many learning lessons. And when I was in the hallways of the courtroom on break, I would make conversations with every attorney that would talk to me, and, you know, and so you share my story. I couldn't afford their consults, but if they're bored sitting in the hallway, I would use that as an opportunity to introduce myself, let them know. And so many were so helpful to me through this process, you know, just really forming those connections, knowing who every single player is in your system. Every evaluator, you need a notebook of just family court professionals. Anytime you hear something about one of them, or you witness an evaluator testifying in court, or, you know, a minors counsel, write down every detail about them so you can make an informed decision. If it, you know, if you are going to be assigned an evaluator. I think one of the things I was so naive about in the beginning, I would, you know, I was desperate for someone to listen to me. And so I would show up in court and I would beg, you know, appoint minors counsel, appoint an evaluator. Somebody's got to see what's happening. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I would have said, you know, here are my 3 selections for an evaluator. I don't care which anybody can choose from this list, but
That's
I
what
would.
I do.
Yeah, exactly. And then it gives the other side the power and control that they need to make that decision. But like in my case, the minors counsel who was appointed, because I didn't know anything about him, he turned out to be a bigger narcissist than
Oh,
my ex-husband in a lot of ways. And so it was a complete waste of time and energy and resources. And so really entrenching yourself in your system and learning the ropes and the people you have to do it.
That's such great advice.
Mhm.
Really, really great advice. As you were talking, I was wondering if one of the other things that you did, because if you did, this would be a great idea. If you know that there are particularly good lawyers or lawyers who understand, what you're dealing with, pleadings are actually public information. So did you go to the clerk and read motions and look at stuff that other lawyers had filed?
So if I saw a case that closely resembled my case, I would take down their names and go find them, because in our court we're pretty archaic. We have like you have to get these little slides and you look
Oh,
at all
okay.
of the microfiche. And so I would go pull people's cases and just sit there and go through their whole case from
That's
start
what I
to
was
finish.
wondering. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's exactly
Yeah.
what I was wondering that you did. Yeah. So that's so smart. Really, really smart. But of course, very time consuming,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So, um, so Dr. Romani, what would be, ways that people can kind of self-care and cope
Mhm.
during this process?
Tina, what is so striking about what you just said, and just so everyone knows, Tina is actually literally one of my favorite people on the planet, and she knows that
Aw.
too. So I really, I know the depth of her story is that, what's striking to anyone hearing this is that, and what I see in many of the clients I work with is that they get exhausted. They go to a place of full on helplessness, hopelessness, and powerlessness, which are often some of the last stops on the train before full blown major depression and anxiety disorders and all of that, like really major psychological and psychiatric, fallout from this. And as a result, the persistence you showed, Tina, is remarkable. Because
Hmm.
and what I love about what you did, Tina, was you weren't trying to control things you can control, namely judges who didn't get it, custody evaluators who didn't get it, court systems who didn't get it. You weren't trying to control those mechanisms. You were trying to learn about them. And of all the guidance I've ever heard, because you feel so powerless, give yourself the time to learn. Look up the cases, learn what happened in those cases, learn about the judges. I mean, I think that anytime we can give a person a sense of control, that's something they can actually do, is really, really important. But I do have to say, Tina, there's a unique resilience that you're manifesting, because I do think for people, the day in and day out, the demoralization, and no matter how much evidence they present to the court, it feels like no matter what, it's not working out their way, to the point where I've seen children who are, being forced to co-reside, and have custody with the more narcissistic parent, to the incredible detriment of the child's mental health. And the mother can't even make the argument in this case that really it is exposure to this toxic parent. I mean, he has completely worked that whole system beautifully. So to your question though, Rebecca, number one, I would say it's absolutely critical you reach out not only for therapy with somebody who gets narcissistic abuse. And I'm really put that point on it, because many, many times I actually don't think that clients in this space should be entirely targeted as though they have post-traumatic stress disorder. I think PTSD is a very different kind of phenomenology. And while addressing early traumas and all of that may be an issue, I think that there's something rather unique about the narcissistic abuse space, because it moves pretty quickly when a person gets lots of education. Because I am shocked in 4 to 6 sessions when a client really is helped to understand what happened, how their own early, their family of origin issues connect, and they see it, they're like, that's it. Like, I'm good. Thank you. I'm not a crazy person. Thank you. That's not how treatment for post-traumatic stress
That
disorder
is
works.
so
Yeah,
good.
it's very, very different. And now, are there many, many people out there who experience issues in their experience of a narcissistic divorce? Physical violence, sexual violence, severe financial deprivation, coercive control, all things that are associated with PTSD? Absolutely. And I do think that is a subset of cases, but I think an even larger subset of cases are people who really are experiencing a more pure version of being absolutely confused by the manipulation. And once they simply get psychoeducation, which is how I got into putting out these YouTube videos, because not everyone could come sit in my office. There's just not even enough hours in the day for me to do that. I wrote books for this reason, thinking if people could get this, they may stop blaming themselves. So it becomes therapy with someone who gets it. Number two is also accessing the advocacy community. That is something Tina opened me up to, is that there are people like Tina out there who get it and put resources out in a way from a lived experience perspective. Her Facebook page is a robust resource that I refer all of my clients going through this too, and to her website. So those services exist, you know, basically a support group mechanism of people who get it. But then beyond that, I really, really do tell people is that you are not defined by this experience. I actually think that survivors of narcissistic abuse who really then take this as a jumping off point, to the degree we're talking about it being a trauma, what I really do see is tremendous post-traumatic growth. People saying, I can see these people coming from a mile away. I am actually going to be a lot more careful in my relationships. I am getting rid of the people in my life who are not good for me. They actually do a whole like clean out, like a toxic dump. They
So
just, they
good.
knock everyone out because they're like, I'm not doing this anymore. And they realize how many people in their midst were the enablers of the narcissistic abuse. And through a good support network, therapy, advocacy, support groups, you get people who say, it's okay. It's okay to remove people from your life, because they'll get a lot of guilt. Like, how dare you not speak to this one? How dare you do you. And so it's very much it's a process of healing, which I've got to tell you, I have seen many, many people soar. They go back to school, they take on the careers they thought they wouldn't, they travel, they feel like better parents. I mean, they really do come out of it. But all of that said, it really is a daily practice. Things like mindfulness, meditation, getting also treatment for other disorders that may have come up or gotten exacerbated, anxiety disorders, depression, substance use disorders that can sometimes flare up in the face of all of this. It's about taking care of you. And also keep in mind, Rebecca and Tina, you know this very well, is that people who've been through a narcissistic divorce or a long period of narcissistic abuse in their lives, self-care for themselves is the first thing they threw out. They stop taking care of themselves. They'll often start eating more poorly, gaining weight, making themselves at risk for things like diabetes. They don't get their regular healthcare appointments. They don't take care of themselves because in some ways, staying in a narcissistically abusive relationship is so sort of self-harming that you're like, why would I take care of myself? You know, it's like you're a car, you just drive into the ground at that point. And that awakening of getting out of that relationship is often an awakening that you're this beautiful soul, this beautiful creature that deserves to be taken care of. So it's lots of enlightenment, lots of awakening, lots of education, lots of support, lots of therapy. And again, slowly but surely going into a wiser future.
Yeah, that's such great stuff. Really, really good advice. And I just want to add in, as far as like the legal perspective on this. Something that people can do is, maybe if you can't afford to have a lawyer for the entire process, but maybe have a consulting lawyer, maybe somebody that you'd be willing to, if you have a little bit of money, you could go in and just make sure that, kind of like what Tina did when she was sort of having these hallway conversations. But, if you wanted to have somebody who was, taking a look at an agreement and maybe just reviewing an agreement for you and just spending an hour of their time doing that, something, where you get a little bit of that legal protection if you can afford to have even that. Obviously I have a program for that as well for people. And, but if there's a way that you can access some help, that's I think really, really helpful for people to have access to that. So I think that so from your perspective as handling the case, Tina, is there anything else that you wanted to add as far as like, advice or things that people can do to manage this if they want to divorce a narcissist without a lawyer?
Yeah, and I wanted to first real quick piggyback on something Dr. Ramani said about my resilience. I want to say, for anybody who's kind of questioning their own resilience, there were definitely times where I crumbled. I pride myself on my documentation and how I went about presenting my case. But if you look at my documentation, there could be a 6-month chunk of time where I didn't document anything. And that's not because there weren't things going on. It was literally because I had to press pause and put on my own oxygen mask and, just take a break from it. Because
I love the way you put that. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, this is daunting. I don't care how, strong
Definitely.
a person is. And I've been fetal position in the backseat of my car after court. And so, I'm human, and it's a difficult battle, but I did prevail. And just if I can add in, in November, we terminated his parental rights, which I was told can never be done, or it's really, really challenging to do in
It is very
California.
difficult. It's difficult anywhere.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
one of the things, going back to the beginning, that I used, I knew money was his biggest button, and the kids were mine, and so I let his child support balance just keep growing and growing. And so by last year, it was $100,000. It finally started affecting him, his passport, his driver's license, and so I finally had that leverage to go, hey, you go your way, I go mine. I forgive the 100,000. I get the girls, and they're gonna live happily ever after. And so, you just never know what's around the next corner. And I want people to know that I see the most dire circumstances turn completely around. I see parents who have lost their kids completely get them back. You just, and that's why you keep going and you keep putting one foot in front of the other.
And that is a really good point, actually. I have seen cases many times where, the narcissist will get the edge early on, and so it just seems like the case is going their way, going their way, going their way. The judge just loves them. They're buying into everything. And you can turn it around. I've turned it around, eventually, if you pull together the right documentation. And I cannot stress enough, I know Dr. Ramani and I both have said many times, please document everything. And, I talked to somebody just this morning, and she was like, I feel like I'm writing this stuff down. It's never going to matter. Who cares? I'm like, no, it does matter. It will matter.
No, and if I can just interject, I say 99% of my documentation has never been seen by anyone. And it was that 1% that protected my kids.
Yep.
So,
well,
yeah.
and I said to her, this morning, I said, you just don't know what that summary is going to be, that's going to be the one that changes the judge's mind. It might be summary of their lies. And, and then you have text message from August 19th and text message from July 31st that, they conflict with each other, or, and that's number one on your summary, and number two on your summary is these two text messages or whatever. I mean, you just don't know until you're looking at the entire picture of it, what you're going to be able to piece together to go, oh, this will be a good summary. Like, how about this that says, how many times the person has changed or didn't show up for their parenting time, or maybe it's, something else that they did, or, times that they gave up their parenting time to be with their new significant other. You don't know until you are able to look at the full mass of all of the documentation. And yeah, so some of it might not end up being used, but a lot of it might be. And I've won entire cases on that. And that's how you shift the judge's perspective a lot of times. And that becomes your leverage.
And I do, once a month, I offer a documentation webinar where I share my entire system that I used to protect my kids. So
that's good. That's good stuff. Yeah, we'll have to make sure that we put a link to that in our show notes, our respective show notes, so that people can find that. Well, this, I think, has been fantastic. Dr. Ramani, is there anything else that you wanted to add on this?
No, I think it's just, I'm so honored to be both with you, Rebecca, and work closely with you, Rebecca, and to have been working closely with Tina. I think that I know more than anything, knowledge and information is so much power here. And yes, to acknowledge not everyone can afford an attorney, but to at least have these, to keep learning about these things you can do and getting the resources, I think it's huge. Like, the main way we're going to dismantle this global scourge of narcissistic abuse, and it's not just in our divorces, that's what we're talking about today, or in relationships.
It's the other global pandemic.
It's everywhere. It is the other global pandemic, honestly. And so it's all over the place. And I think that the more we can create information about this, the more people can protect themselves. This is real. And to everyone out there who has spent years, maybe I'm the crazy one, maybe there's something wrong with me. Absolutely not. My entire life is devoted to helping people stop gaslighting themselves and to start putting the responsibility on these broken systems and people, frankly, out there who are contributing to that sense. So I'm honored to work with both of you, and I'm hoping that this kind of information really helps people set themselves free and grow into the full, amazing human beings that they have the potential to be.
Well, the feeling is completely mutual, 100%. And Tina, I want to give you the chance to have the last word if you want to have it, since you won the battle. You did it.
I did. And, I'm breaking the cycle. I came from a dysfunctional upbringing, and it has been my goal since the day I had children, and recognize that there were problems, that it ends with me. And, my girls are teenagers now, and they can go into a coffee shop and say, Mom, that guy's a narcissist, or, or on social media, they recognize who the selfie people are. And, I think it's hope for our next generation because of people like Dr. Ramani, who are out there and shedding light on this very, very dark topic. And you, Rebecca, and I'm just so honored to be a part of this collaboration because I think it will help so many.
Thank you. And thank you both. This is fantastic.
Thank you.